A child of light, walking in darkness, by Thomas Goodwin. Chapter 2. The particulars of the distress contained in these two phrases, that is, walking in darkness, having no light. From the text Isaiah chapter 50, verse 10. Who is among you that fears the Lord, that obeys the voice of his servant, that walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of the Lord and stay upon his God. Child of light, walking in darkness. Chapter 2. The second thing to be inquired into is, what is the condition of such a person who is thus in darkness and has no light? Which I will so far discover as the phrases used here will give light into by the help of other scriptures. First, he is said to have no light. Light, saith the apostle in Ephesians 5:13, is that whereby things are made manifest, that is, to the sense of light, to which light properly belongs, and as light and faith are here severed or disrupted, as you see, so sight also is, in 2 Corinthians 5:7, distinguished from faith, which is the evidence of things absent and not seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. When therefore here he says, he hath no light, the meaning is, he wants or he lacks all present sensible testimonies of God's favor to him. He sees nothing that may give sensible, present witness of it to him. God's favor and his own graces and all the sensible tokens and evidences thereof, which are apprehended by spiritual sight, are become all as absent things, as if they were not, or never had been. That light which ordinarily discovers these as present, he is clean deprived of. To understand this, we must know that God, to help our faith, which, as I said before, is distinguished from sight, as we now speak of it, vouchsafeth a threefold light to his people, to add assurance and joy to their faith, which is to faith as a back of steel to a bow, to strengthen it, and made to be taken off or put onto it at God's good pleasure. First, the immediate light of his countenance, of his face, which is a clear, evident beam and revelation of God's favor, immediately testifying that we are his, which is called the sealing of the Spirit, received after believing, Ephesians 1, verse 13, which David desired and rejoiced in more than all worldly things, Psalms 4, verse 6. Lord, lift up the light of your countenance, in which, more or less, in some glimpses of it, some of God's people have the privilege to walk with joy from day to day. See Psalm 89, verse 15. They shall walk, that is, from day to day, they shall walk in the light of thy countenance. In thy name shall they rejoice all day. Psalm 89, verse 15. And this is here utterly withdrawn, and it may thus come to pass that the soul, in regard of any sense or sight of this, may be left in that case that Saul really was left in. 1 Samuel 28, verse 15. God is departed from me, and does not answer me, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Though with this difference, that God was really departed from Saul, but to these, but in their own apprehensions, or their own consideration, yet so as, for aught as far as they could tell, they could not see of him. God is departed clean from them, answers them neither by prayer, nor by word, nor by conference. They cannot get one good look from him. Such was Jonah's case in chapter 2, verse 4. I am cast out of thy sight. That is, he could not get a sight of him, not one smile, not one glance or cast of his countenance, not a beam of comfort, and so thought himself to be cast out. And so he dealt with David often, and sometimes a long time together. See Psalms 13, verse 1. How long will you hide your face from me? And also see Psalms 89, verse 46. How long, it appears in Psalm 89, verse 46, how long? Even so long as David puts God in remembrance and pleads how short a time in all he had to live, and complains how in much of that time his face had been hid from him in verse 47. And the like was Heman's case, and this also long, even from his youth up. See Psalm 88, verse 14 and 15. So from Job chapter 13, verse 24. Yea, and from Christ himself, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? When he was on Calvary, the cross of Calvary. But concerning this you will ask, how can this dealing of his stand with his everlasting love, continued notwithstanding to the soul, that he should deal so with one he loves, but especially how it may stand with the real influence of his grace, powerfully enabling the soul all that while to go on to fear and obey him? For the first, it may stand with his everlasting love, and God may be his God still, as the text tells us. So in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 8, for a moment I have hid my face, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee. It is but hiding his face and concealing his love, as David concealed his love from Absalom when his bowels yearned towards him. And God takes the liberty that other fathers have to shut his children out of his presence when he is angry. And it is but for a moment, that is, in comparison of eternity, though haply it should be thus with him during a man's whole life, and he therefore takes liberty to do it, because he has such an eternity of time to reveal his kindness in, time enough for kisses and embraces, and to pour forth his love in. And for the second, the real gracious influences and effects of his favor may be continued, upholding, strengthening, and carrying on the soul still to obey and fear him, whilst he yet conceals his favor. For when Christ complained, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? When as great an eclipse in regard of the light of God's countenance was upon his spirit, as was upon the earth, yet he never more obeyed God, was never stronglier supported than at that time, for then he was obeying to the point of death. Like as we see that when the sun is eclipsed, though the earth wants or lacks the light of it, yet not the influence thereof, for the metals which are engendered in the bottom of the earth are concocted by the sun, so as though the light of the sun comes not to them, yet the influence and virtue of it does, and alters and changes them. So does God's favor visit men's hearts in the power, heat, and vigorous influence of his grace, when the light and comfort of it does not, but is intercluded. There's a Latin phrase that I can't pronounce, so I'll skip that part. Number 2, the second light which God vouchsafeth his people ordinarily to help and eke out their faith is the sight and comfort of their own graces, unto which so many promises belong, as of their love to his people, fear of his name, and desire to obey him. So that often when the sun is set, yet starlight appears, that is, though that other, the immediate presence and evidence of his favor, shines not on the soul, yet his graces therein appear as tokens of that his love, so as the soul knows that there is a sun still that gives light to these stars, though it sees it not. As in the night we know that there is a sun in another horizon, because the stars we see have their light from it, and we are sure that it will arise again to us. Now a soul that has true grace in it, and goes on to obey God, may also want or lack light to see these his graces, and look upon his own heart as empty of all, and as they in the storm, Acts chapter 27, verse 20, so he in temptation may come to have neither sunlight nor starlight, no light, as in the text, thus Isaiah chapter 63, verse 17. The church complains that God had hardened them from, that is, away from his fear. They were afraid, feeling their hearts so hard that the fear of God was lacking, which yet was there, for they complain of the want of it. 3. But yet thirdly, though he lacks the present light of God's countenance in the sight of present grace, yet he may have a comfortable remembrance of what once before he had still left, and so long is not utterly left in darkness. Therefore further know that the state of one that fears God and obeys him may be such as he may have no comfortable light or remembrance of what grace formerly he had. 2 Peter 1:9. One that hath true grace in him only lacks the exercise of it, for I take it that place is to be understood of a regenerate man, because he was purged from sin, and is now said to lack grace because he doth not use it. A man is said not to have that which he doth not use, when he ought to use it, especially in things whose worth lies wholly in use and employment, for it is as good as if he had it not. Now such a man may fall into such a blindness that he cannot see afar off, and so forgets his former assurance, that he was purged from his old sins. Yea, indeed, it may be, calls all into question. Thus David did in Psalms 30, verse 6 and 7. Though his heart was but even now a little before full of joy, in assurance of God's favor, yet God did but hide his face, and all was gone. I was troubled, he said. He was thus blind, and could not see what was but a little past him, as it is with men in a mist. And the reason of these two last assertions is as evident as the experience thereof. For graces in us shine but with a borrowed light, as the stars do, with a light borrowed from the sun, so that unless God will shine secretly and give light to thy graces and irradiate them, thy graces will not appear to comfort thee, nor be at all a witness of God's favor to assure thee. For our spirit, that is, our graces, never witness alone, but if God's Spirit joins not in testimony therewith, it is silent. The Spirit of God witnesses with our spirits, says Paul in Romans chapter 8:16. Now therefore, when God hath withdrawn his testimony, then the testimony of our hearts and of our own graces has no force in it. But you will say, can a man have the exercise of grace and not know it? Can he fear God and not discern it? Yes, and some graces may then be as much exercised in the heart as at any other time. He may fear God as truly and as much as ever, and yet this fear have no light in it to discover itself to him. It may be in the heart, in esse et operati, when not in cognicy. That is, I believe, interpreted from Latin, that is, the grace of God may be in the heart in operation when not in the cognizant in the cognizant awareness in the mind. It may have a being and a working there when not in thy apprehension, that is, in thy estimation of it. The reason is because as the influence of God's favor may be really in the heart when the sense, the sight, and the light of it is withdrawn, as was said before, so the power of grace may in like manner be in the heart when the light and comfort thereof is wanting. And although it is true that every man having the power of reflecting upon his own actions can discern what thoughts are in him and what affections, and can tell, for the matter of them, what he thinks on, that he puts his trust, and that he is grieved, but yet so as he may still question whether those thoughts be acts of true and unfeigned faith, and whether those affections of sorrow for sin be sanctified affections, holy and genuine and spiritual affections. And the reason of the difference is, because though the natural spirit which is in a man knows the things of a man, as the apostle hath it, 1 Corinthians 2:11, that is, his own thoughts, understanding them physically as they are acts of a man, yet what is the true goodness of them morally, in discerning this, the spirit of a man is deceitful and cannot know it. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. Without the supernatural light of God, of the Spirit of God, who as He is the giver and actor of that grace in us, so is given of God that we might know the things which are given to us of God. 1 Corinthians 2:12. Light is sown for the righteous, and joy for the upright, says the psalmist. Grace and the exercise of it is the seed which they continually scatter, but light and joy is the crop that is to be reaped. The seed often lies hid long, though it will come up in the end. Thus light or joy may be severed from grace, and the comfort of it from the power of it. 2. Secondly, let us further consider the other phrase and what is intimated thereby to be his condition when, as it is said, he walks in darkness. First, to walk in darkness implies to be in doubt where to go. So John chapter 12, verse 35, he that walks in darkness does not know where he goes. And thus the soul of one that fears God may be filled with doubts whether God will ever be merciful to him, yea or no, and not know what God means to do with him, whether he shall go to heaven or hell. See Psalm 77, verses 7 through 9. Will the Lord be merciful, which speeches are spoken doubting with doubt and hesitation? For verse 10 he says, this was his infirmity, to call this into question. So Heman in Psalms 88, verses 5, 6, 11, and 12, he thought himself as one that was in hell, free among the dead. That is, when he said free among the dead, that is, as one admitted free into the company of them there. Verse 5, free of that company, as you used to say, and of the number of those whom God no more remembered. In such darkness was he, verse 6, and to raise him out of that condition was a thing he doubted whether God would ever do. Verses 10 through 12. Will you show wonders to the dead? Shall thy wonders be declared in the grave? That is, did God ever show mercy to one that was in the same state that they in hell are in, which is my state now, yea, so as to be out of hope. So also in Lamentations 3, verse 18, my hope is perished. My hope is perished from the Lord. 2. Those in darkness are apt to stumble at everything. So Isaiah chapter 59, verse 10. One effect of darkness mentioned there is to stumble at noonday. Quote, they stumble at noonday. So take a soul that is left in darkness, and it will stumble at all it hears out of the word, either in conference or at sermons, all it reads, all promises it meets with, it is more discouraged by them. Oh, they think that there should be such glorious promises, and yet they don't belong to us. Such a person misapplies and misinterprets all God's dealings in the scriptures against himself, and, quote, refuses comfort, as Psalms 77 verse 2 says, yea, and as at the 3rd verse, when he remembers God, he is even troubled. I remembered God and was troubled. See Psalm 77 verse 3. Thirdly, darkness is exceeding terrible and full of horror. When children are in the dark, they think they see fearful sights. It is therefore called the horror of darkness. Genesis chapter 15, verse 12. So his soul here may be filled with fears and terrors from God's wrath, and of God's being an enemy to him. Heman was almost distracted and out of his wits with terrors. See Psalms 88, verse 15. And so the church thought in Lamentations 3. Yea, and it concluded it for certain that God was her enemy. She thought in verse 3 of Lamentations 3, surely he is turned against me. This concludes chapter 2 of Thomas Goodwin's A Child of Light Walking in Darkness. God willing, more chapters to come. If you desire to hear more, pray for this work, that I may have the will and the strength to perform it. God's grace be with you, child of God. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. He gives his beloved sleep. Amen.